Right, so Keir Starmer's first Labour conference as Prime Minister appears to be setting itself up to be remembered for just one thing: yet more scandals on his watch. They've come so thick and fast over the last day, basically, that it has completely derailed Labour conference, and so it should. When the excuses to take donations from wealthy individuals is considered completely okay by those questioned about it, but it's clearly not okay when almost in the same breath, those same MPs then blame their children for having to take certain donations, to hiding behind excuses that it was their birthday, to needing to dress nicely but still claiming these clothes weren't gifts. And literally all of it, every one of these scandals builds on the previous ones surrounding Keir Starmer and his wife's clothing donations, because all roads have led back to Labour super donor Lord Waheed Alli, right down to how he ended up actually getting that Downing Street pass, because now at last we know. And that in and of itself, the optics of that, could mean passes for glasses, and everything else we've seen come to pass at Labour conference really just boils down to a good old-fashioned cash for access scandal.
Your declaration showed that you received £14,000 from the Labour donor Lord Alli last year. What for exactly?
Yep, so I received that money from Waheed Alli, who's a long-standing Labour peer. It was used to fund 2 events, all of which was declared properly and thoroughly. That's why that information is in the public domain. The first event was ahead of my birthday, so I was turning 40. I thought it was a good opportunity to get people together in a professional context. So it was journalists, trade unionists, education people, MPs and shadow cabinet. The second event was an event that I held also again for lobby journalists, for people in the education world, as part of a reception. That's, you know, it was in a work context, you know.
That's a very nice thing, but if a Tory had done that 2 years ago, I know exactly what you'd be saying to me this morning. They should pay for their own birthday parties.
Look, this was in a work context. I didn't even invite my own...
You just said the same thing.
Yeah,
Come on.
I didn't even... My own family didn't come to that. It was in a work context. I celebrated my actual 40th birthday with my family. We went for a pizza. I celebrated with my kids. What I would say about Lord Alli is that he's been a Labour peer for, I think, over 25 years.
Yes.
Donates to the Labour Party, to Labour politicians, because he wants a Labour government.
But he got a temporary Downing Street pass. From Sue Gray, we hear today, Labour Party have been very reluctant to say who sanctioned this pass. It was Sue Gray. That happened after he donated £10,000 to Leon Conlon's campaign. Leon Conlon is now the MP for Beckenham and Penge. He's also Sue Gray's son. There's something quite murky about that. I think if that arrangement had happened under a Tory government, ministers like you would be on the airwaves having a real go at the opposition about that.
Right, so that was Bridget Phillipson there, the Education Secretary, who was doing the Sunday morning media rounds, both on Sky and entertaining GB News as well at Labour conference itself. Again, I disturbingly find myself in agreement with Camilla Tominey, but let's face it, Labour isn't far enough to the right to please the likes of GBeebies, and are too far to the right already to appeal to a rotten lefty like me. So we're in that enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of position, I suppose, even though we don't much like it. Anyway, she had a mare in both interviews, seemingly completely oblivious of the optics of what she was justifying, smiling through as she was saying it when everybody watching was wondering what cuts are coming for them, whilst these politicians in front of us entertain themselves, it seems, with a very rich man's money, because it is all Lord Waheed Alli again. He is literally, seemingly at the centre of every scandal being exposed at Labour conference almost. He's like a walking, talking cash point for Labour ministers at this point, and other key figures. But this cash point will want something in return, because donors always do. Sure, he's been a Labour peer since the late 90s, but what difference does that really make? Let's start with Phillipson anyway. There's quite a lot to get through. That's all come out in the very short space of time, a day pretty much, as I said. And whilst you might have caught wind of 1 or 2 of these issues if you were following the news yesterday, I bet you didn't catch them all. And no, there isn't a Pokemon joke coming through that, now that I've said that, although I do now have the mental image of Lord Alli currently looking at Starmer's Labour with a wad of cash in his hand instead of a Pokeball and thinking I've got to catch them all, because it very much does feel like he is collecting Labour ministers at this point. At any rate, Bridget Phillipson, with grin on face, justified £14,000 from Lord Alli, which paid for a birthday bash, as she referred to it, despite saying it was thrown for journalists, trade unionists and other MPs. Exactly what work got done here then? And then she threw another event for the lobby journalists. Well, that was nice of her, wasn't it? She did mention people from education were invited to both, so I'm wondering why she needed to throw 2 events if both were basically tantamount to the same thing then. It's your birthday. Pay for it yourself then. What is Lord Alli getting in return here? Earlier on in that interview with Camilla Tominey on GBeebies, she was also asked about this donation, and Phillipson repeated her claims. But then Tominey asked, well, what was the birthday element then to your birthday bash? And this is relevant because it wasn't actually Phillipson's birthday at all. It was coming up for it, and she spent her actual birthday apparently having pizza with her own family, as most people would spend their birthdays with. So what did her birthday actually have to do with any of that donation? And that's a valid point. She brings it up. But both events were just opportunities for a Starmer minister, in fact, to schmooze the press. Journalists were invited both times. Journalists in both interviews were who Phillipson mentioned first and foremost. It all smacks of another exercise of backside kissing by Team Keith, who were desperate to court their favour. Tominey then, of course, moved on to Sue Gray, but I'm going to come back to that one in a moment because there's more to that than has actually been discussed in this interview here. Before I move on from Phillipson completely, though, and she wasn't the only one to make this particular claim, was in regards to free Taylor Swift tickets, of course. These weren't from Lord Alli. These were from the FA Premier League. And others who have had these range from such as Keir Starmer to Darren Jones. But both Jones and Phillipson were consistent in their defence of taking these tickets by blaming their children for it. Too hard to turn down, Phillipson said. Too easy to be bought and paid for then, aren't you, is what I say. Especially when the FA has a vested interest right now in the Football Governance Bill going through Parliament, which if passed, will appoint a regulator for the top 5 tiers of men's football in the country. And you can imagine the wealthy and powerful in that world aren't keen to be told what to do by somebody else. Combine this with all the free football tickets Team Keith have been lavished with as well, that Starmer can't say no to. He was watching Spurs with David Lammy and Sue Gray, as it happens, just yesterday, in the corporate box no less, along with corporate lobbyist Kate Perrier, who is lobbying on behalf of the football giants and was herself formerly a political advisor to Theresa May. So all Tories sat together. If this bill falls or gets watered down in any way, people will be rightfully pointing to these tickets and asking, was this the price of that? Tickets well spent by the football lobby, as that will have been. But back to the Lord Alli lobbying, though, and back to more clothes, as it now has merged, is that not only did Lord Alli dress Starmer and his wife with clothes donations, but he also apparently dressed Angela Rayner, and Rachel Reeves has had another donor supply her with clothing. But we've only now become aware of this because those two didn't list the clothes under gifts and benefits like Starmer did. They chose to list these donations under office support. So clothes are now the equivalent of what? Staff in their own right? Do they get a salary now then? Or is it support more akin to an office chair? Either way, it is clearly nonsense. Lord Alli lavished £3,550 on Rayner for clothes, and Reeves had another donor, Juliette Rosenfeld, the wife of former Jewish care trustee and property mogul Andrew Rosenfeld, hand her £7,500 by way of clothing in 4 instalments between January last year and May of this year. Jewish Care, incidentally, is a charity caring for Jewish communities in the southeast, but is notably pro-Israel. Its annual Jewish Care dinner held back in January of this year was attended by Rishi Sunak, but also had the likes of Maureen Lipman, Rachel Riley and Rabbi Ephraim Mervis in attendance, and was gushingly covered by the scandalised in and of itself Jewish Chronicle at the time. Coming back to Rayner, though, it wasn't just clothes Lord Alli has handed her, as it seems, but the keys to a New York apartment too, for the sake of a holiday last December. It really is all coming out now, and you wonder again, much like we wondered when Partygate stories started to break, and Boris Johnson was scandalised, just how long the media was sat on such stories as those before they decided they were worth covering and making public. We elected these people to government with a massive majority. Would we have done so if we'd known about half of these issues beforehand? Anyway, it must be nice to be able to just toddle off to New York for a break, and she took the then MP for Ilford South Sam Tarry with her. He, of course, since getting deposed by the Starmer regime in favour of tax-dodging slumlord Jazz Athwell, because clearly he's more Starmer's sort these days. But we've got to come back to the Sue Gray part of that GBeebies interview as well, because it turns out the allegedly temporary Downing Street pass handed to Lord Alli came from Sue Gray. But making the optics of this story so much worse is the fact Gray's son Liam Conlon got 10k from Lord Alli towards his campaign. A virtual unknown as he was, but he's Gray's son. And so the optics here of a cash for access scandal are screamingly loud. But what wasn't mentioned in that interview, and that potentially deepens this scandal regarding Sue Gray, the Downing Street pass, and Liam Conlon's aspirations to become an MP further, surrounds another chap called Matt Folding. Holding, not a well-known figure either, I certainly haven't heard of him, was last September as it happens, appointed Secretary of the Labour Party. Apparently as a reward for running Labour's parliamentary candidacies, and I've certainly covered plenty of those. He was the fixer, the guy who made sure the right sort, the Starmer sort, got selected to stand as MPs, which is why we have so many horribly loyal Starmerites voting through noxious stuff on the green benches now. Well, Faulding took up that selection role whilst he was on secondment from his actual job, as it turns out, which, according to Michael Crick, was working for Lord Alli. So was the Downing Street Pass a bit of a thank you for the donation to Liam Conlon's parliamentary campaign, or for him getting selected even? Or maybe both? This is what people would be rightfully asking, looking at this situation right now. The involvement of Lord Alli in this new Labour government just goes deeper and deeper, and I doubt we've heard the last of it yet. And in another round of what is becoming customary Labour dishonesty now, that budget we're all dreading? Well, what if I told you that the cuts to the winter fuel allowance, the refusal to scrap the two-child benefit cap, were all cruelties that are now completely unnecessary? The government now has the money to deal with these and the alleged financial black hole problems they didn't know they had, yet also won't give us any details of now, but are still going to carry on with more austerity anyway. Get the details of this story in this video recommendation here, as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.